The wind came first, crawling over the ridges like a wounded animal. It moaned through the brittle grass and groaned against the beams of the old barn, pressing dust through every crack. The snow followed, not flakes, but sharp, angry pellets that hissed through the night air and stung the skin like grit. Elias Boone stood on his porch, one hand around a tin mug of coffee gone cold, and watched the land vanish beneath the storm. It was the kind of night that dragged up memories, whether a man wanted them or not. The barn door had creaked earlier than usual, but Elias hadn't thought much of it. The latch was old, the wood swollen from years of weather. Still, something in his gut turned uneasy. He set down the mug, pulled on his coat, and took his lantern into the dark. His boots broke through thin crusts of snow, crunching with each step. The barn loomed ahead, a black hulk against the storm, and the closer he got, the more he felt it. Something wasn't right. Inside, the horses shifted nervously, snorting and stamping. A scent lingered in the air, human, but not sweat or leather. Sour, weak, desperate. He raised the lantern and swept it across the stalls, shadows jumping like ghosts across the walls. Then he saw her. She was curled in the hay near the back, pressed into the corner as if she could melt into the wood. Her dress was torn and filthy, legs bare and streaked with mud. Her arms were wrapped around herself, thin as fence rails, shaking. Hair matted, tangled across her face. She didn't look up. She just flinched from the light, like a frightened animal. Elias stood there for a long moment, the lantern trembling slightly in his grasp. Then he took off his hat, a silent act of reverence, almost like prayer, and knelt beside her. "You're home now," he said, voice low and gravel-worn. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She didn't answer, didn't move. But when he reached out a hand, her fingers twitched, as if they remembered a time when hands were safe. He scooped her up gently, cradling her like something already broken. She was so light he feared she might vanish in his arms. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her skin was ice. Elias didn't ask questions. He just carried her through the snow, back to the house. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them like an old coat. He laid her on the cot beside the fire and fetched the kettle from the hearth. Broth was all he had, salted chicken and a few herbs, but he spooned it to her lips as if it were gold. She took it slowly, eyes never quite meeting his, but she drank. She wouldn't give her name, wouldn't speak at all for the first 2 days. Every loud sound, the crack of a log in the fire, the screech of the wind against the windows, made her jolt like she'd been shot. She'd eat only what he placed beside her, and only when he left the room. When she did finally speak, it was no more than a whisper. One word, "Clara." He didn't push for more. There was a scar on her temple, just above her right eye, half hidden beneath the tangle of hair. It looked old, the kind left by a bottle or the butt of a pistol. Elias didn't ask. He'd seen enough in his day to know the story scars tell, even when mouths won't. His days returned to rhythm. He rose before the sun, fed the horses, chopped wood. Clara stayed mostly in the house, wrapped in one of his old coats, watching the fire like it held secrets. He began leaving books on the table beside her. She never said a word about them, but they shifted position each day. Sometimes pages were marked with a scrap of yarn. Elias Boone wasn't a man given to company. The war had stripped him of patience for crowds, and the bounty work that followed had taken whatever trust remained. Folks called him Boone the Black Wind in those days, a shadow that came through towns, left a trail of bodies, and vanished like smoke. But that was a long time ago. Now he lived quiet on the edge of Black Hollow Canyon, a stretch of land where the sun lingered low and the nights bit hard. He had 2 horses, a mutt too old to bark, and more silence than a man could rightly use. Clara changed that. Slowly. She didn't talk much, but her presence filled the space. He noticed when her footsteps began to echo in the hall, when she started sweeping the porch or mending torn sleeves from his shirts without being asked. She was rebuilding herself, not loudly, not quickly, but piece by piece. One morning, he found her standing at the barn door, hand resting against the wood like she was listening to it. Snow was melting then, and the sun had started to bite back at the cold. "You fed him already?" Elias asked, thumbing behind him toward the horses. She nodded. They liked the mare better. He chuckled. That's 'cause she's meaner. Clara almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The days slipped by in that easy, quiet rhythm. But Elias knew it wouldn't last. The girl hadn't wandered into his barn by accident. She was running, and not from hunger or the cold. Her eyes carried something darker. The way she watched the tree line. How she jumped when boots thudded on the porch. She was waiting for someone. And Elias, he was waiting too. He hadn't picked up a gun in near a decade. Hadn't needed to. But he still oiled them. Still checked the rounds. There were instincts that never dulled, not really. Just went quiet. Like wolves sleeping beneath snowdrifts. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind began to rise again beyond the windows, Elias sat in his old chair with a pipe unlit between his teeth. Clara sat by the hearth, sewing the hem of her dress with fingers steadier than they'd been a week ago. He watched her a long while. Finally said, "When the time comes, you don't have to run anymore." She looked up. Her lips parted as if she meant to say something, then closed again. He didn't press. He'd lived long enough to know that sometimes silence was the only truth worth trusting. And so the wind howled outside, and the fire burned on, and a man once known as Death's shadow watched over a girl who'd been born into too much darkness. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew. Something was coming. Clara didn't speak again for days. She moved like a shadow through the house, quiet, watchful, never far from a window. Elias gave her space. There were things a man could fix with a hammer or a rifle, but not this. Not the kind of quiet that came from being hunted. It was near dusk when she finally spoke. Elias had just finished tending the horses and was brushing the frost from his shoulders as he stepped inside. Clara was sitting in his old rocking chair by the fire, knees pulled to her chest, her voice a whisper barely louder than the wind. They were in black coats. Elias froze, coat half unbuttoned. "Who?" "They killed my brother." He didn't sit. Just stood there in the orange firelight, hands loose at his sides. Her voice didn't shake, but something in her eyes did, like a glass too full and ready to spill. "They came through Miles City 3 weeks back. Said they were looking for someone. Wore long coats, dust-covered. One had a scar on his neck like a second mouth. We knew they weren't marshals." She swallowed hard. "My brother tried to get us out. We ran west. Thought we lost them." She fell silent, gaze drifting back to the flames. Elias nodded slowly, then moved to hang his coat. He didn't press. The rest of it would come in time, or it wouldn't. Either way, it changed nothing for him. Later that night, while Clara slept beneath a pile of quilts, Elias knelt by the hearth to stir the embers. That's when he noticed something crumpled near her boots, worn leather, stretched and cracked. Something stiff poked from the inside. He pulled it out gently. A torn piece of paper, folded and stained with old rain. It was a wanted poster. Not of Clara. Of a man. Young, broad-shouldered, his eyes hard but not cruel. The name scrawled beneath the sketch matched the one Clara had given, Weston Ray. Charged with armed robbery. Train holed up outside Billings. Member of the Crow Snake Gang. Elias stared at the poster for a long time. He'd seen that name before. And the gang. He knew them by reputation. Ruthless, mean-spirited types. Opportunists with guns. No code. No soul. The kind of men who shot you in the back and looted your boots. He burned the poster in the fire. But sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, Clara found a bowl of oatmeal waiting and Elias outside, splitting logs. She joined him without a word, taking the axe when he paused to stretch his shoulder. She wasn't strong, not yet, but she was learning. She had the look of someone who'd never had much time to be a child. "You loved him?" Elias asked, after a long silence. Clara paused, breath fogging in the air. "He raised me. After our folks passed. He was only 21. He part of that gang." She looked away. "He got mixed in, yeah. But not because he wanted to. They owned the sheriff. Ran the town. Said they'd feed us if he joined a job or two." She gripped the axe tighter. He never liked what he did. Never smiled again after the first ride. Elias nodded. "That sounds like something a good man might do, if he didn't see no other way." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and something in her face softened. For the first time, the wall cracked. That night, the dog barked. It was sharp and sudden, different than when a squirrel crossed a fence line. Elias was up before the second bark, rifle in hand. He stepped onto the porch, eyes sweeping the darkness. Then he saw it. A rider on the far ridge, just a silhouette against the dying purple sky. Still, watching, then gone. The old man's jaw tightened. He went back inside and locked the doors. Trouble wasn't coming. It was already here. He sat at the table, rifle laid flat in front of him, oilcloth beside it. Clara watched from the doorway. Someone up there? He didn't look at her. Not someone looking to borrow sugar. She didn't ask more. Just walked to the shelf, pulled down a tin of beans, and set it beside the fire. They ate in silence. That night, sleep didn't find either of them. Elias sat with his back against the wall, eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the windows. The wind had stilled, but the house creaked like it was holding its breath. He lit his pipe, but didn't smoke it, just let the comfort of it fill the space. He thought about Santa Fe. It came in flashes now, not full memories. Blood on the saloon floor. A man begging with one lung. The acrid burn of gunpowder in his mouth. He'd walked away from all of it after the bloodbath at Del Rio Junction. Threw his name into the dirt, buried his pistols, bought land so far from anything that even the stars looked lost. Boone the Black Wind. That was the name they gave him. A ghost with a six-shooter. He hated it, but he never forgot how to be him. The next day, Elias rode out early. He scanned the hills for prints, for movement, for signs of life beyond coyotes and jackrabbits. Found nothing. That only made it worse. Men like that didn't just pass by. They waited. By the time he returned, Clara was cleaning the rifle. She looked up, neither ashamed nor surprised. I figured I'd best know how to use it. Elias considered her for a long time, then nodded. You ever fired one? No. Tomorrow. We'll fix that. They trained in the canyon's mouth, beneath the twisted cottonwoods. Elias set bottles on logs, showed her how to breathe, how to wait. She was a quick learner. Not strong, but steady. Every time she hit glass, her shoulders squared a little more. When she missed, she reloaded with clenched jaw and fire in her eyes. He'd known killers. She wasn't one. But she wasn't prey anymore either. That evening, as they sat on the porch and watched the sun bleed over the horizon, Clara spoke again. They followed us from Billings. We thought we'd gotten away in the river bend, but one of them saw us climb out. She swallowed, eyes fixed on the dying light. Weston stayed behind. Said he'd buy me time. Elias said nothing. There was nothing a man could say that wouldn't ring hollow. He just passed her the coffee tin, and she drank it without flinching. The next morning, the dog didn't bark, but Elias found boot prints near the barn, deep, deliberate. He saddled his horse without a word. Where are you going? Clara asked. Town. Supplies. Maybe ask a few questions. I should come. He paused. No. You stay. Watch the land. If you see anyone, take the high spot, and wait till I come back. She wanted to argue, but didn't. She just nodded. Before he left, he handed her the rifle. Not the old one, but his own. The one with the notch on the stock. She looked at him, confused. It kicks harder, he said, but it don't miss. He rode fast. Dust curled behind him as the land raced past. He didn't trust the lawmen in Cheyenne Flats. They were either blind or bought, but he needed word. A name. A trail. Inside the saloon, whispers followed him like flies. A man with a face like a worn boot muttered under his breath, Ain't that Boone? Elias ignored it. He found the barkeep, asked low and quiet if any strangers passed through recently. Few days back, the man said. 3 fellas. Long coats. One had a scar on his neck looked like he'd been born with a knife in it. Elias didn't smile. Didn't blink. Where they go? The barkeep swallowed. Asked about a girl. Rode north. By the time Elias left town, the wind had picked up again. The land seemed to lean forward, waiting. He could feel it now. Not just danger, but destiny curling like smoke on the horizon. Something was coming. And this time, he wouldn't run from it. The lantern flickered as Clara sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, her eyes dark and distant. The silence stretched long between them, broken only by the ticking of Elias's old clock and the occasional spit of sap from the fire. Outside, the wind had died, but the stillness felt heavy, expectant. "He wasn't like them," she said quietly. Elias turned from the window, where he'd been staring into the black line of the trees. "Your brother?" Clara nodded. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, grief too worn to cry over anymore. "Weston did what he had to. After the town sheriff sold us out, the Crow Snakes came in like a plague. They took everything. Stores, land, people. My brother tried to resist at first, but he saw what they did to the men who said no. They strung up one in front of the church, left him swaying for 2 days." Her eyes shone in the firelight. "He told them he'd ride with them if they left me alone. And they did. For a while. But you don't make deals with devils and walk away clean." Elias sat across from her, one arm resting on his knee, the fire reflecting in his tired eyes. "We left after he tried to back out. Said he wasn't going to rob trains 4M anymore. We hid in a preacher's cellar in Dry Creek. They found us the 3rd night." Her fingers clenched the mug. "He told me to run. I didn't want to. He pushed me. Told me to keep west and not look back. I heard the gunshot before I made the ridge." Her voice cracked, the pain no longer avoidable. "He wasn't a killer. They made him one." The fire popped, and Elias looked away. There was nothing to say. Some things a man couldn't fix. All he could do was listen and remember. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Elias sat at the kitchen table, alone with his thoughts and the cold creak of the house settling around him. He reached beneath the floorboards and pulled out the old revolver. The metal was still clean, but the leather grip was worn and cracked from years of sweat and blood. He oiled it in silence, his fingers steady despite the memories rising with every rotation of the cylinder. The gun wasn't just a weapon. It was a history book, etched in lead. When he was done, he didn't hang it on the wall or put it back in the floor. He laid it beneath the bed, within arm's reach. Some things you just didn't bury forever. By spring, the girl was different. She moved with purpose, no longer a drifting shadow in the house. She fed the horses before Elias was up most days, cleaned the tack, learned the rhythm of life on the land like she was born to it. She spoke more, smiled occasionally. She asked to ride. Then she asked to shoot. Elias taught her the way he'd taught young marshals once, long ago. Not for glory, not for show, but to survive, to keep a steady hand and a clean breath. She listened hard, her body still fragile, but her focus unwavering. The first time she hit a bottle at 30 yards, she didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, as if claiming back a part of herself. It was early evening when the first sign came. Dust rising along the canyon trail, not the soft breeze kind, but the heavy, deliberate march of hooves. Elias was on the porch, smoking. Clara was by the barn, brushing down the mare. He squinted toward the horizon. "Riders," he muttered, and Clara froze. 5 of them. They came slow, like they owned the land. The leader wore a black duster that fluttered behind him like vulture wings. His face was lean, eyes sunken, and a jagged scar curved across his mouth, as if God had tried to erase it halfway. Burke Harlan. Elias recognized him instantly. The others were cut from the same cloth, rough men with twitching fingers and cruel mouths. They didn't dismount, just stared. "Evening," Burke said, voice dry and smug. "Hell of a place you got here." Elias didn't respond. He stepped down off the porch, hand resting loosely near his belt, but not yet threatening. Burke nodded toward Clara. "We're here for the girl. She stole something from us." Clara didn't flinch, didn't move behind Elias. She stepped forward. "You mean my life?" Burke laughed. "That too, maybe. But your brother took something from us first. Information. Names. We don't forgive." Elias raised a brow. "This is my land. My home. She's under my roof." Burke leaned in his saddle. "Then it'll burn with her in it." The other riders chuckled. One spat into the dust. "You'll want to think hard on that," Elias said, voice soft but cold. Burke's smile curled cruel. I've heard of you. Boone, right? Used to be something. These days, I reckon you're just a name on a bottle. Elias said nothing, but his eyes drifted to the man's forearm, where a tattoo curled above the glove. A snake wrapped around a crow's skull. He knew that mark. He'd seen it once on a man dying in a church fire. That same tattoo, bleeding down charred skin. The crow snakes had done more than ruin Clara's life. They'd taken his, too. Years ago, in the border town of Merrill Ridge, they set fire to a clinic where his wife had volunteered. They called it clearing the rot. She'd been inside when the roof collapsed. Until now, Elias had never known who. Just that they'd vanished into the wind before any justice could be served. And now here they were, sitting on horseback, laughing like it was nothing. Burke tipped his hat mockingly. We'll be back tomorrow. Sun up. If she ain't outside, we'll come in. Don't matter how many walls you've got. The five of them turned without a word more, hooves pounding like war drums as they vanished over the ridge. Elias stood still a long while. Behind him, Clara spoke quietly. You saw the tattoo. He nodded. They killed her, didn't they? She asked. He didn't answer, just turned and walked inside. That night, they made ready. The rifle was loaded. The barn windows shuttered. Clara gathered supplies, without being told. There was no fear in her eyes now, only resolve. They worked in silence, side by side, two souls shaped by loss, no longer running. Outside, the stars burned cold and fierce. War was coming, and neither of them would meet it with empty hands. The night before the storm broke, the land went still. Even the wind hushed, like the earth was holding its breath. In the dying glow of the fire, Elias tightened the wire snares across the lower trails. Trip lines at the eastern fence. Broken glass beneath the porch steps. He worked methodically, like a man sewing the final seams of his own burial shroud. Clara watched from the barn loft, rifle cradled in her arms. She'd stopped asking questions. Now she just listened to the clicks of metal, the crunch of Elias's boots, the lessons he gave in half-muttered phrases. Don't shoot twice if once will do. Never wait for a clearer shot. Don't trust shadows to stay still. When the traps were set and the windows boarded, Elias handed her his second revolver, polished to a dull silver. You sure? She asked, testing the weight in her palm. Elias nodded. Ain't just mine to carry anymore. They barely slept. When dawn cracked over the ridge, it didn't come gentle. It arrived on hooves. 8 riders now, black shapes galloping down the canyon trail, firelight from torches dancing off their barrels. They came like wolves with iron teeth, war cries echoing across the land. The dust they kicked up trailed behind them like the tail of a storm. Elias stood in the yard, coat flapping like a banner, hat brim low. His eyes never left the riders. No tremble, no words, just stillness. Burke Harlan led the charge, rifle held high. That ragged scar on his lip twisted into a smirk. But when he saw Elias standing alone, he pulled back the reins hard. The horse reared, snorting clouds into the cold air. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Boone the Black Wind. A whisper of unease rippled through the gang. Some of them had heard the stories. Ghost tales mostly. Men dying before they drew. Shadows moving like death with boots. Most thought Boone was long dead. Didn't figure you still breathed. Burke called out. Elias didn't blink. You still ride like a coward. Burke's smirk faltered. The moment lingered, then guns roared. The barn took fire first. A torch lobbed through the open window, igniting dry hay with a hungry whoosh. Clara, crouched in the loft, held her breath as smoke curled up toward her. Below, muzzle flashes split the morning light, cracking like thunder against the timber walls. Elias moved like a man born in war. He stepped sideways and shot one rider clean off his horse. Another bullet grazed his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He ducked behind the corral fence, fired again, and the horse beside Burke screamed and crumpled. Wood splinters flew, and the air filled with the stench of burning straw. Clara lined up her sights from the barn loft. Her hand shook, just a little, but her breath was even. She found her target, a man creeping toward the porch with a shotgun, and squeezed the trigger. The shot hit his shoulder, spinning him sideways into the dirt. He screamed, clutching at his arm. Clara gasped, but didn't look away. Instead, she chambered another round. Elias was bleeding now. A shot had caught him in the side as he vaulted behind the trough. Blood soaked through his shirt, sticky and dark. He pressed a hand against it and growled through his teeth. No time for pain. Only motion. Two more came around the side. One stepped into the snare trap and went down hard, screaming as the wire tore into his ankle. Elias shot the second through the chest before the man's rifle could rise. The shot echoed like a crack of lightning across the canyon. Smoke swallowed the barn. Clara coughed and crawled toward the far window, eyes burning. Flames licked the rafters above her. She couldn't stay. She tucked the rifle under her arm and dropped to the ground below, landing hard, rolling to her feet. She saw Elias stumbling toward the shed, blood streaking his side, jaw tight. Another outlaw was closing in on him from behind. Without thinking, Clara raised the revolver Elias had given her. She didn't aim. She didn't breathe. She just fired. The bullet struck the outlaw's thigh, sending him face first into the dirt. Elias turned, surprised, then met her eyes across the smoke. She ran to him, grabbed his arm. "We need cover." He leaned on her, teeth clenched. "Shed." They staggered inside, doors slamming behind them. Gunfire continued outside, blind, furious, desperate. Clara knelt beside him, hand pressing down on his wound. "You're hit bad." Elias pulled the revolver from his belt, placed it in her hand. "You're not just safe now," he said, voice strained. "You're strong." She nodded, biting back the fear clawing at her throat. Through the slats in the wall, she could see Burke dismounting. He moved slow, careful. The others were down or retreating, some crawling, some already cold in the dust. Only Burke remained, rifle in hand, walking toward the shed like a man walking into church. Elias stood, shaky but steady. He pushed open the door and stepped out, revolver loose at his side. Burke's rifle was already raised. "You should have stayed buried. You should have picked another road," Elias answered. Burke laughed, cold and sharp. "You remember Marrow Ridge?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "I rode with Caleb Boone," Burke went on. "Hell of a man. Loyal. But he wouldn't play the game, so I burned him out. Thought it might shake you loose from hiding. Took your wife with it, didn't it?" The words hit like iron. For a moment, Elias saw it all again. Flames licking the roof. Her hand pressed to the glass. The silence that followed. A grief so deep it nearly drowned him. Burke sneered. "You think this is justice?" Elias raised the revolver. "No." The shot came so fast it was barely heard. Burke's chest jerked once. He staggered back, dropped the rifle, and sank to his knees. Then he was still. Elias swayed, legs trembling. Clara caught him from behind as he collapsed, easing him to the ground. "I got you," she whispered. "It's over." His breath came shallow. His eyes fluttered open and met hers. "No," he rasped, a faint smile forming. "Now it begins." Behind them, the barn crackled as flames consumed what was left of the past. The bodies lay scattered like broken debts. And as the sun broke cleanly over the canyon rim, the wind rose again, but this time it carried no threat, only silence, and the promise of peace. The barn burned to its bones before the last embers died. Ash floated through the morning air like snow, drifting across scorched earth and broken timber. Smoke curled over the canyon, slowly unraveling into the blue. Clara stood barefoot in the mud, bucket in hand, her sleeves rolled and face streaked with soot. She moved with purpose, dousing what remained, hauling water from the creek without pause or complaint. The wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't brush it back. Her eyes were fixed on the land, on the charred fence line, the splintered porch rail, the pieces left behind. Inside the house, Elias lay on the cot by the window, wrapped in bandages and silence. He'd lost a lot of blood but kept breathing, stubborn as the land itself. The doctor from town had said it would be slow healing, but healing all the same. Clara sat with him every night, changing the wrappings, feeding him, talking about things that didn't hurt. Horses, books, the way the moonlight painted the canyon silver. The Crow Snake gang was finished. No one came looking for them, not even to bury the bodies. When Clara rode into town weeks later for supplies, folks watched her, not with suspicion, but with something like awe. Whispers passed from lips to ears like ghost stories. That she was the girl from the fire. That she'd stood beside the Black Wind himself when death rode through. She didn't correct them. The ranch had scars now. Blackened barn walls. Bullet holes in the porch beams. But it stood. And so did Clara. She never asked Elias what he planned to do next. She didn't need to. One morning, she pulled a branding iron from the coals and marked a new plank for the gate. Boone Andre. She hung it herself. He smiled when he saw it. Didn't say a word. Just nodded. By the end of summer, Clara had rebuilt half the barn with her own hands. She'd learned to ride like she was born to the saddle. Took to leading the mare with a whistle. She fixed a fence line, traded hides in town, stacked firewood in clean, neat piles. She never asked for permission. She didn't have to. She wore Elias's revolver now, the one with the worn grip and silent history. It hung on her hip not like a threat, but a promise. Weeks later, a rider came. Dusty badge. Blue coat faded by sun. A U.S. Marshal with a slow gait and sharp eyes. He dismounted at the edge of the yard and looked around. At the rebuilt barn, the repaired fence, the black scorch marks still visible in the dirt. Elias watched from the porch, a blanket across his legs. Clara stood beside him, hand resting lightly on the revolver. The marshal didn't draw. "Gunfight here?" he asked. "Raid," Clara answered. Outlaws came looking. Left disappointed. The marshal squinted toward Elias. "You look familiar." Elias said nothing. The marshal studied him a long moment, then looked back at Clara. "You're the girl who was running," he said. She met his eyes. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, then tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode on. The silence after felt sacred. That evening, the sun poured molten gold across the canyon. Clara walked to the ridge alone, boots scuffing dust, coat flapping behind her in the breeze. The sky stretched endless above her, streaked with orange and crimson, the last light of the day, catching the old revolver at her hip. She stood at the edge of it all, no longer a girl curled in hay, afraid of footsteps. The wind caught her hair and lifted it like smoke, and she let it. Her chin was high, her breath even. Behind her, the house waited. The land waited. A new life waited. They say legends fade like dust in the wind. But out by Black Hollow, there's a girl with fire in her eyes and a man who once took off his hat and said, "Asterisk, you're home now." Asterisk.